Good afternoon. Thank you for being available. As you know, we had 11 votes at 1:30, so it prevented us from being here earlier in the day. As you know, as we gather here, American consumers are paying a big price at the pump, with gas prices going sky high while oil companies raked in $30 billion in profit in the first quarter, the big five oil companies. But Republicans keep insisting that taxpayers continue to give tax subsidies to big oil. And the Republicans insist on just presenting drill-only bills, which do nothing to bring down the price at the pump now. Last week, we gave Republicans a chance to vote to end one of the most egregious subsidies to big oil, but they said no. 7 times this year, we have given Republicans a chance, and 7 times they have voted against holding big oil accountable and providing relief to consumers. Today, Democrats are proposing a plan called Make It in America, Clean Energy Jobs Now. It's a plan to invest in American energy, put consumers first, and create jobs. Again, as you may know and remember, last week we announced the Taxpayer and Gas Price Relief Act sponsored by Congressman Bishop of New York to eliminate those tax breaks for the 5 largest oil companies, saving the taxpayers $31 billion over 10 years. Just think of it. That bill, which the Republicans said no to, would save the taxpayers $31 billion over 10 years because they said the oil companies really needed that money, when they made over $30 billion in the first quarter of this year, the Big Five. Today, we're putting 2 more measures on the table. Increasing Energy Production Act Now, that's being sponsored by Congressman Connolly of Virginia, and he's here to talk about enacting recommendations of the bipartisan BP Oil Spill Commission, and he will describe the legislation. And Building Our Clean Energy Future Now Act, sponsored by Congressman Cicilline, encouraging new alternatives in transportation and how we build our infrastructure and developing and manufacturing advanced vehicle technologies. There's a markup in the Energy and Commerce Committee, so Congresswoman Eshoo was going to talk about electric cars and Mr. Waxman about new technologies for the future. May or may not be here for that, but we will hear from the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, John Larson, to talk about an initiative he's very passionate about, and that's natural gas, and Mr. Markey, who has led the way, written the books, preached the gospel on how we can be much more energy efficient in our country, save the taxpayers' dollars, and protect the consumers. So now that I've introduced them, you will hear from them in order. And I thank in advance all of them for their leadership, and I'm pleased to yield the floor to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Leader. I want to thank Leader Pelosi for her leadership on this issue and my colleagues for their wonderful work and leadership on this issue as well. It's almost Kafkaesque, the world we're living in last week and this with respect to energy and especially oil production. We are truly turning the clocks way back. And so we are introducing comprehensive legislation, one piece of which is a bill I've introduced, as the Speaker said, Increasing American Energy Production Now Act. It would boost production of domestic energy and expand supply. The legislation would do that by incentivizing leases in areas where oil drilling is already allowed but is not occurring. It restructures the fee structure for oil companies that have those existing leases but aren't using them. If those companies don't start pumping oil and gas, their fees increase over time, encouraging them to boost production now or pay more. It imposes a deadline in production from lease areas in Alaska, and if oil companies don't start production, then they'll risk losing access to those leases altogether. The Increasing American Energy Production Act now requires the Department of the Interior to take leadership role in energy development. It requires the Secretary to establish a benchmark for oil production during oil companies' primary lease term, encouraging oil production now. It requires the Secretary to begin conducting lease sales in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, where oil drilling is already allowed and permitted. To date, such lease sales have not taken place. And this bill would require the Department of the Interior to push oil companies to begin production now. The language would not open the Arctic refuge to drilling. Frankly, we're focused on those areas where it's already permitted. How about using the leases you've already got? If we really mean it, that domestic production increases could make a difference, then let's take advantage of that which we already have. This oil production will occur in a safe manner by codifying the legislation codifies recommendations from the National Commission after the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster by A, implementing these regulations to improve the reliability of blowout preventers, such as the one that failed at Deepwater Horizon, that improve the inspection regime, which was clearly inadequate and failed Deepwater Horizon, that improve oversight of construction of well components, such as the casting that was installed incorrectly and caused the blowout, and finally, that support and expand the administration's laudable efforts to reform federal oversight of oil drilling, formerly conducted by the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, now managed by the Bureau of Ocean Management, Regulation, and Enforcement, pronounced BOMER. And so this legislation, I think, is a common sense piece of legislation that would do what the majority says it wants to do, and that is to increase domestic production so that we can lessen our dependence on foreign oil. And it would basically say to the oil companies and gas companies that already have leases and permits, use them now or pay a lot more for that privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Conley, and thank you for your leadership on critical short-term gas price relief measures for American consumers. I want to acknowledge and thank our leader, Leader Pelosi, for her steadfast commitment and real vision on reducing our country's dependence on foreign oil and for investing in clean energy technologies that will help our economy continue to recover and help our manufacturers and workers compete in the 21st century global economy. I just finished speaking on the House floor today about the importance of critical short-term measures to relieve pain at the pump, measures to release oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and stop big oil companies from price gouging. We need to take those short-term measures to provide relief immediately to Americans at the gas pump. At the same time, we've got to embrace a long-term strategy that invests in our clean energy future now. Because if we're going to compete in the long term, we've got to make investments in the short term. It's time to pull the plug on the billions of dollars in tax subsidies for big oil and invest those dollars in the research, development, and production of clean energy technology and transportation. And that's why I'm very proud today to sponsor the Building Our Clean Energy Future Now Act, because this is how we're going to move our country forward to compete in the new energy economy. And I'd like to now introduce Representative Larson, who will talk about one of the pieces of the bill. Our chairman.
Well, thank you very much. And it's an honor always to be here with our leader. And, I've become a big fan of T. Boone Pickens over the years, and primarily because Mr. Pickens says something that this caucus and this leadership under Nancy Pelosi has demonstrated that it can do time and time again. And that's to look at something that's affordable, accessible, available, and American. And that's what our bill is all about. The Natural Gas Act focuses on a resource that is American, that is abundant, that's available, and will put people back to work. At the core of this bill, and what makes sense, common sense and practical sense to everybody, is to understand that if you take a look at our 18-wheelers, and for every 18-wheeler that we convert from diesel to natural gas is the equivalent of taking 300 automobiles off the roads in terms of what it does with regard to pollution. But as everyone knows, the important thing, as our theme throughout this year has been, is to make it in America and to use American technology and know-how to produce the kind of vehicles that will provide us with a cleaner environment, that will put more Americans back to work, and will build on the resources that are uniquely American and provide us with a cleaner environment at the same time. This has broad bipartisan support because of the nature of what this bill does, because it helps create the jobs that are needed. It taps into a resource that we have. It uses our latest technology, and it is uniquely American. And with that, let me turn over to Mr. Waxman.
He's not here.
Who's not
He's
here?
marking up in committee. He may
So
be.
we'll turn over to Mr. Markey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, so much. So what is happening? Well, we know, according to Goldman Sachs, that there is a $20 per barrel premium that has now been built into the price of a barrel of oil, which translates to 33 cents a gallon at the pump. The Republicans are trying to take the speculation cops off the beat by cutting the budget of the CFTC. The Republicans are trying to stop the CFTC from putting tough new regulations on the books, which will stop the oil market from turning into a crude oil casino, which it has become. They are committed to ensuring that the price of oil for ExxonMobil, for Shell, for Conoco, for BP stays as high as possible. How high is that? $10 billion in profits in January, February, and March for ExxonMobil. $8 billion for Shell, $7 billion for BP, $6 billion for Chevron, $3 billion for ConocoPhillips. At the same time that they're trying to ensure that the CFTC cannot stop this speculative rise in the price of oil, they are also trying to ensure that the oil companies continue to keep their oil tax breaks of $4 billion a year. So on top of all these profits, just for 3 months, they want to give them an additional $4 billion worth of tax breaks. Just absolutely unbelievable. And it's driven by this speculation. There was one day in March when the value of 180 million barrels of oil was traded on the New York Mercantile Exchange in one day. That's twice the total number of barrels of oil in the world in one day was traded. Now that wasn't people that didn't represent people who were trying to buy oil, store it, keep it, and sell it. Those are just speculators out there playing games, looking at Libya, looking at Saudi Arabia taking 800,000 barrels of oil off of the marketplace. So what, on top of that, were they trying to do? Well, on top of that, they were also committed to ensuring that they could pay for those tax breaks. And how do they pay for the tax breaks for the oil industry? Well, they want to put an oil rig on top of grandma's Medicare card and drill into her pockets for the money that would be given to the oil industry to pay for the tax breaks to the industry that is reporting the largest profits in the history of the world. That's where they are right now. Stop the CFTC from going after speculators, cut their budget, give them tax breaks, take it out of Medicare. And so what do? The Republicans have turned themselves into the gas and oil party and the get old people party simultaneously. An almost impossible political position for a party to put themselves in. But it is politically suicidal because the American public is outraged that the oil industry expects tax breaks and that it will come from grandma and grandpa in nursing homes and in need of help from those who are grateful to what they did to build our country. So this is a historic moment. The bills that are being introduced go right to the heart of the real agenda, which we should have for our country, and we hope to have this debate take as long as is necessary because we think that we will prevail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markey. By the proposals that we are putting forth today, all of which, when they come to the floor, will be paid for, Some of them, which we introduce next week, are paid for by the lifting of the tax subsidies for big oil. But what is important to note about that is it will create jobs, it will help the consumer, it will help the taxpayer, and it is a situation where some of that money will be reinvested into the new technologies to create clean energy jobs for the future, to keep America number one internationally. What you've heard here today is we're saying, yes, drilling is important to have it's. Let me make this distinction. There are plenty of places where drilling is allowed, where it isn't being drilled, that oil isn't being drilled. There are plenty of places where drilling is not only allowed, but permitted. Permitted. The permits are already there. They're just not using them. So Democrats are not against expanding drilling. But what we're saying is that's not the only answer. It doesn't affect the price at the pump right now. What we have to deal with at the price at the pump right now is what Mr. Markey talked about speculation and some of the initiatives that my colleagues talked about. And what we have to talk about is doing it in a way that gives relief to the consumer, respects the taxpayer, creates jobs, and does not call upon our seniors to pay more for their health care, to get less in benefits in order to give big oil big subsidies. Again, I thank my colleagues for their leadership and getting out there on these issues. Mr. Waxman and Ms. Eshoo are in a markup, and Energy and Commerce, as is our leader, House Democratic Whip, Mr. Hoyer, who has been a champion for Make It in America, and in this case, Make It in America with clean energy jobs now.